And we're rolling once again, guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Solvable Mysteries podcast. My name is Juras, and as always, I'm joined by Glenn Highcove. Yo, man, are you doing all right on this Friday evening?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. I'll keep it real, because someone I know may listen to this later. But the Heiko family is having a pretty tough time this week, and I'll leave it at that for now. Probably maybe something will come out a little later, but yeah, for now, I will say I guess that my main point is here. Last episode I went on a little bit of a rant at the end, like the last 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and I certainly think if you didn't listen to the end of last episode, for those listening or watching, check it out because I kind of outdid myself a little bit. And sometimes it's funny because or weird. Sometimes I feel like I can almost see into the future when I do things like that because I'll go. I've done little rants like that before, and then like one time I did a rant like that, and 9/11 happened, and I was literally talking about that kind of stuff, and then it happened, or sometimes I'll have dreams about this is the paranormal part of the show, right? I'll have dreams about people dying that I know, and then maybe there'll be a death in the family or something like that. And I don't know. Anyway, long story short, something pretty severe did happen. Literally within 24 hours of me making my big speech, but it just makes me really want to double down on what I was talking about last time, which is really live your life to the fullest. Love your family members. Don't don't end anything on a sour note. Don't make the last thing you said to someone you care about something awful. Make sure it's something really nice. So, yeah. With that, I think we're probably ready to jump into the show.
Right. Yeah, that's really good words, actually. I don't really want to comment too much on the whole situation as well because I'm not 100% sure about it. But today, we do have a really interesting case. I think you would agree that it's probably not a usual case. And just in general, we're like taking a little detour from like the usual themed episodes. I think, we wanted to do something really like a big time mystery, if that makes sense. And I think this mystery right here is pretty much as big as it gets. I think it's probably the biggest mystery of humankind, I think, if that makes any sense. So, without any further ado, obviously from the title and the thumbnail, people probably know what we're talking about. But we're gonna be talking about the moon landing and whether or not it was fake. Obviously we're not gonna come to a conclusion at the end because neither of us are like experts on this thing, and I would say especially myself, I'm just really curious about like these things. I would say Glenn probably definitely knows more about this whole concept than me, so I'm just sort of here for the ride and just I guess manage the assets, video assets. I do have some interesting footage that we probably will gonna be showing on this episode. I do have the Google Earth guide that when we will begin talking about this case, for everyone who's on not on our YouTube channel, I will play like the Google Earth. The actual app, that you could download on your desktop computer. You could play like the guide and things like that of like Apollo 11, Buzz Aldrin. So we'll just play that. Glenn just showed me how to mute it, so that's pretty cool. So that we could talk over it, and yeah, pretty much. I think we are ready to get into it. One thing to mention before we go. I'm not sure if I didn't ask this of Glenn, but I personally don't have a strong opinion regarding the Apollo 11 missions. I know that to some people that probably never thought about this case, that may sound crazy. How could you not have an opinion? The moon landing obviously happened. I personally don't know if it obviously happened because I never really looked into it that much, and I believe personally it's a little bit stupid when people never looked into something, but they just sort of know that it happened, it didn't happen. I don't know if it happened. There's some you you just have to like listen to some of the people who are denying it, and you will find some pretty weird details. There's some pretty weird footage. I mean, all of it could be explained, and I've looked into all of the explanations. The explanations makes sense to me personally because I'm not an expert. So the explanations make sense, but there's so many things to explain. So I think we're gonna touch a little bit of these on the show. Now I will hand it over to Glenn. Dude, you wanna bring us into this case or anything you have prepared to like for the initial
Yeah.
parts?
Yeah, I'll do the premise actually. So, I mean, it's funny because there's certain things I when I was growing up in the 80s, there were certain things that were cliche, like for sure. And it's funny because I don't even think I realized how cliche, how like immediately cliche it was. So like when I was a kid, the joke was like that Elvis was still alive. Um, the joke was like, where's Jimmy Hoffa buried? He's buried under Giant Stadium. Things like that. But for some reason, I almost think the idea that the moon landing could be anything other than what it was depicted as, which is reality. Uh, the idea that it could be a hoax, I never ran into that. I don't know if that's like a cultural thing, if it has to do with what part of the United States I grew up in. I don't know if it's like a socioeconomic thing. I don't even know if it's like a religious thing, because as we researched this, and I've kind of heard over the years, there were definitely big swaths of people, both in the U.S. and around the world, that harbored, let's say, suspicions that everything wasn't what it appeared to be, and like as just proving this is the case. There's actually been not just books, which I think there was one book in particular that got this all going, but there was a pretty cool movie that I watched from the 70s, from 1978, that was kind of like the same premise, except it was a Mars mission that gets faked instead of the moon mission. But it's pretty interesting I guess it never ever occurred to me that this could be something fake. Now, I'll tell you just right up front, I have strong opinions that the moon landing wasn't faked. But that being said, I'll say that I'll definitely humor arguing about it or debating it or discussing it for like a couple of good reasons. Reason number one is, if you believe in something from a scientific standpoint, well, you should definitely be able to back that up. Like, I'm not, look, this isn't to trash religion, but I want to say that like religion and science should be in their own realm. So something you believe in on faith, that sounds like religion to me, and no one's going to talk you out of your deity or your messiah. But when you're saying something about science and you want to talk scientific facts, well then yeah, like definitely be able to discuss that and clearly explain why you believe what you believe, because otherwise to me you're sort of putting something in the realm of like religion or voodoo or just beliefs that don't have any basis, and I don't really feel like there's a lot of room for that. Obviously we're still in the realm where not everything, for sure a lot of things are not scientific fact, but a lot of scientific theories have some pretty good basis, and I think obviously we don't have total knowledge, but you should be able to explain it. I think that the other part of it is it's fun. So I think I've heard a lot more about it when I started listening to Joe Rogan, where he started bringing it up. And Rogan used to be a lot wackier in the old days. He used to bring up a lot of kind of more off the wall stuff, and Rogan himself has gone from being kind of a true believer of a lot of fringe things to especially after he did that show, I can't remember what channel it was on. He did a show about the paranormal, and that kind of backfired, where it ended up kind of him seeing how many people were full of it, that believed in weird things. So ever since then, he's become a lot more skeptical. But yeah, from my point of view, it's certainly like I'll tell you, if you go to the Wikipedia on this, it is fascinating to read all these different aspects. Like, it reads like a pretty cool science fiction novel.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. By the way, I just want to confirm that you could also see this guide
Oh yeah.
on. Yeah, so basically, one thing I want to mention off the bat. Well, if I could just like sort of bring it back a little bit, because I did look into some cool things. I know we can't obviously talk about everything. Did I mess it up? Let's see. Nah, I don't think. I just
Oh, looks good.
wanna No, I just want to bring this whole thing back a little bit. Maybe it will make sense. Wait, I know this is probably pretty weird for everyone who is not listening, not watching of what we are doing. Okay, whatever, dude. You see this little this big crater right now? You see it?
Yeah.
I think either it was that big crater right there or the one that they are just approaching right now. Basically, right? I mean, this comes from Buzz Aldrin, and I've seen this video, I think like a few days ago, which was pretty interesting. Yeah, I think it was this crater. You see that small little crater, right? They were supposed to land where the crater is at, but I believe I obviously could be mistaken here, but like Neil Armstrong was like, yo, there's a crater, let's like move a little bit further into it. So I found it very interesting. I mean, probably someone will correct me if I'm mistaken, but that's apparently what had happened. Also, another thing, I want to mention off the bat that computers, right, like the computer used in my car right now is apparently like a whole lot stronger than the computer used in this aircraft, because it was like obviously 69. You know, in 69 you didn't have any strong computers, but I will say that they had this sort of computer. I will not, I don't remember how you're supposed to like pronounce that computer or anything like that, but that computer sort of kept like numbers like ones and twos and O's and things like that, which like sort of measured like the distance to some degree, I guess. Or like you know, when a number switches to another number, that sort of indicates that you know, they're probably decreasing their altitudes in respect to when they're like about to land on the moon, right? So that data from that computer is lost, and this is like real. You know, NASA has said that that data is lost, and pretty much this is crazy to me. Like, how did you lose that data? I'm sure that, you know, there's a good explanation to that. Like back in this all happened back in like '69 and things like that. So people pretty much lost things. I don't know. I believe Buzz Aldrin is like the last living person who is like connected. Maybe someone like from the NASA scientists or anything like that. But I know for sure that everyone who landed on the moon and walked have passed away. I believe 2018 was like the second last person who died. And yeah, pretty much. I think that's just pretty crazy. Do you have any input? Like they lost the data.
Yeah, I mean, and that's, like I said, that's one of the things that is true from the moon hoax conspiracies, that like they did lose the, let's call it the, like I said, the flight data. Um, it,
How do you
it's
do
interesting.
that? How do you do that?
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing is it's super, especially when it comes to government and the military, and it's not really the military, but like a government service. So this isn't me capping on government. I mean, I'm like in the middle. I'm not an anti-government person, but man, I guess so. A couple of things. I think one thing is, back then people didn't really, the things people got sentimental about. So if you were like, dude, this is super important, this is a landmark, you know, I mean, this is, we have never really done anything this great as a species since then in space, right? This is the top. For some reason, computers and data storage and things like that, a lot of people couldn't even wrap their heads around that. It's just so interesting because people were using other forms of data being stored in things like record players and tape machines and, you know, of course, film. But for some reason, when it came to computers, and I mean, I see it now. I see it now in jobs I've worked where people that are super brilliant have this like blind spot when it comes to something computer related sometimes, just because they have this weird fear about it. But I would say that's part of it, is just it's a cultural thing where, like the moon lander, yeah, the moon lander, pieces of rocket ships, rocks from the moon, helmets, spacesuits. Well, everyone knows, oh, that's a souvenir. That for sure should be it. That's, you know, that's a something that's part of our heritage
Dude,
that should be in the
could
Smithsonian. Yeah.
could I step in for 1 second? Speaking of souvenirs, right? Apparently they brought a whole bunch of moon rocks, and I was listening to this information only on Joe Rogan. I didn't re-verify this, so I may be wrong here, but according to Joe Rogan, right? At least that's what he said. he said that they gave, you know how there's like the Netherlands, there's this country called the Netherlands. It's a pretty significant country historically and things like that. It's in Europe, obviously, you know about it. Basically, they gave, I believe, the prime minister of the Netherlands, or maybe it was the president. I don't know if Joe Rogan mentioned that. They gave like after, they came back and everything like that, they gave that country as a gift a moon rock that was later determined to be just some wood or something like that. Like it was a wooden thing. So apparently they gave the real thing. To my understanding, they gave the real thing to like you to England, right? They also maybe France, but I think they gave like the fake thing to the Netherlands or thing like or something like that. So yeah,
That's funny. They thought they were high. They wouldn't know. Um,
yeah, exactly,
yeah,
exactly,
I
yeah.
don't. Yeah, I mean, I, I always have to take what I hear on Rogan with a little bit of reservation because like Rogan is good at two things. He's good at comedy and he's good at remembering everything accurately around like fights, MMA fights and boxing matches. And everything else, man, I could tell you something, but I used to listen to him a lot. He used to frustrate the crap out of me because I would listen to him and I would hear him get something wrong. Um, and, like, I mean, from his point of view, hey, he's just a comedian, right? He's not portraying himself as an expert on those topics. But, for someone to say something wrong out there with a huge audience like him, it can be frustrating. And because then you got a bunch of people parroting him, not, I think obviously he knows he's more responsible with that stuff now. I will say that, when we were talking about, just rewinding for a second, we are talking about losing things like information. The other part of it is these places are always really strapped for budget. So what'll happen is like they'll need, let's say, another recording device or another recording medium
Like
to do
NASA.
something. Yeah, NASA. I mean, they're not. You know what it is? It's their funding is not bottomless, and it was this was during a period where they gave them an extraordinary amount of funding. I mean, they gave them funding that was probably maybe not as big as the Manhattan Project, but it was getting up there
I think it was
compared to other budgets.
30 billion. I've heard
And
like the that,
yeah, in 1960, late 60s, early 70s dollars, which is amazing.
yeah,
That's probably trillions of dollars now if you adjust for inflation, but it's
probably not a
it's
trillion, or maybe I don't know, dude.
I just think that unfortunately, with all the other money, the money is being spent on things that are super expensive, and there's never enough of anything. And yeah, for sure, unfortunately, it's not the only time in the history of, like I said, government service where they've done something kind of short-sighted, or someone said, "Oh, let's just record over this." But yeah, no, that's happened before.
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, and in terms of I think I remember I was trying to, now that you say that thing, there was some other story about one of those, someone had a moon rock from government service that was trying to sell it on like eBay or something. I'm trying to remember what that story was. I think they got caught. You know what I mean? Like somebody was like, "Oh, I'm just going to take this moon rock that's
wow.
here in my office, that was donated like in the 70s, and I'm going to
Wow.
try to sell it." And they got nailed on it. Like like,
To be
like no one would
honest,
notice.
to be
Yeah.
honest, I'd probably do the same thing, to be
I
because I
mean,
want that money.
yeah, I mean, but it just, it's like it's not really theirs to sell, right? Like it was given to their country. So yeah, anyways,
Exactly.
it gets crazy. I mean, I guess the things that, well, okay, if we rewind for a second, the one thing that's interesting is when I was looking at the Wikipedia, I was like, when did when did everybody come up with this weird theory? Why was everyone so suspicious? And it's fascinating because one of the people that, while there was, I guess, some amount of disbelief, especially from people that maybe didn't believe in science or didn't understand the science behind it, and the science is, I mean, still mind-boggling, right? I mean, I guess the only thing that kind of helps me feel a little better about it is,
Mm,
what, 20, 30 years before that, we split the atom. So, that's also pretty amazing, right? To make nuclear weapons 30 years before this happened. But Yeah, I mean,
It did.
it's
I will say it did seem like it was like it all happened really quickly, and it all happened really conveniently. I will say that. In terms of like convenience, I just want to get us a little bit in the reasoning why this would be faked, right? So the main catalyst for faking it was obviously the Soviet Union. You know, like my side of the world. You know,
yeah,
the good old USSR days and things like that, right? So basically, USSR apparently, you know, and this is what I'm really finding surprising every time I'm looking into like this period. Apparently, in terms of like rocketry and things like that, apparently they were ahead. You know, for the longest time they were ahead. I believe definitely with some of the Sputniks, it definitely was the first one to leave, I'm assuming, the earth orbit or something like that, or just go in general into space. So the Soviets pretty much did that the first. Also, I think we need to talk about on this show probably eventually about the proposed people who have been because you know Yuri Gagarin is allegedly the first person who went to the to space. Pretty much why I say allegedly, because I believe if I'm not mistaken, and we definitely need to talk about this on some other episode. Maybe people maybe our audience members can like comment or anything like that and tell us if they want to hear that. But apparently before Yuri Gagarin, you know, the first man on the in space, there were like at least two other people. This is unconfirmed obviously, and this is like a conspiracy theory, but there are apparently like two other people who have went to space, and pretty much they were not able to go back, so
yeah,
and they just like sort of
yeah.
floated into the abyss, you know, of
Yeah,
space.
I think there's one, at least one that's confirmed where they heard him. Like it's just,
Wait, what? So it's real?
yeah. Well,
What?
I'll have to re-research this again because I've looked this up before. There was one where like the guy like whatever
Oh,
happened, he was out of control and he was just gonna spin out there and not
Jesus
not be able to
Christ.
come back. And wait, I think there was one where the guy was gonna come in for the landing and it wasn't going to work and he was going to die and he was like cursing them the whole way in. But then there was one that was, like you said, was sort of alleged where I think one or more people, supposedly as the story goes, they were lost to space and somehow escaped out there. The one thing is, so there's this game called Kerbal
Yeah, space
on
station.
Steam. Yeah, and it's a space simulator. It's actually pretty cool because it gives you a pretty good idea of how this rocket science works. And rocket science is interesting, but it's not. You can wrap your head around it.
Yeah,
Um,
it's all good.
so I thought I hit mute. So yeah, I think that. But what's interesting is it's actually pretty hard to get enough escape velocity. For the first thing is to even get enough energy to get out of Earth's orbit. Let's say out of Earth's gravity well. It takes a lot of energy, and here's the problem with going into space. The more stuff you put on it, on a rocket, the more fuel and the bigger rockets you got to put on the rocket. So the rocket has to be bigger for every like exponentially for every little bit of extra stuff you put on it. And the part that sucks is, well, you're throwing until SpaceX, you were throwing all that stuff away. Like you were just, whatever, the rocket goes into stages, and then like you just blew like a couple $1 billion in that thing you're never going to use again. But the other thing is that the more stuff you put on it, the more fuel you need. And even the fuel needs fuel. You know what I mean? To like push it up into space. So it's like the more
Mm.
fuel you try to put on the rocket, the bigger the rocket needs to be, which means it burns even. It's like this crazy calculation. I think it's called delta X of what you need just to get up into space and escape a certain amount of gravity. It's actually really hard. Like when you go, here's the other thing people don't realize. It isn't just like you kick in your engines and you're in orbit. Oh no. Kicking in your engines just gets you in this like big parabola that will eventually come crashing back onto Earth. You actually have to, when you're on the other side of that
Mm.
that parabola, you actually have to fire your engines again. So you have to have enough fuel to fire your engines two or more times, potentially if you have to fix your orbit again or do something else. Like it's not easy, and that's why there's a it's part of the reason why we haven't done as much in space as we'd like to, like they thought we were going to do
By the way,
in
dude,
the old days. Yeah.
one thing I want to ask you, maybe you will know this, maybe someone in our audience will know this, because I have like these crazy things that I found really interesting mapped. Apparently, after these, because Apollo 11 wasn't like the only mission that went to the moon, right? There were a few in total. I believe there were 12 people who walked on the moon. Apparently, everyone was American and no one else besides America, right? So, apparently, no one after that has ever, you know, I guess, flown, how should I put it, like, flown further into space from Earth than 400 miles, if I'm not mistaken. So like apparently all of the International Space Station, things like that, apparently that's not even farther than 400 miles. Now I don't really know the distance between Earth and the moon, but I'm pretty certain that's not you know that's a lot more than 400 miles. So I would say it's pretty crazy how they traversed such a long distance, like within the period of 3 years, and then they never ever like went even longer than 400 miles. I mean, obviously, one of the reasons being that there's nothing else, in between, I guess, Earth and the next planet. There's literally nothing else, so there's not maybe that much of an incentive to go, any farther into space. But that's something interesting, right? That they never really went far ever again. Like they went super far for like 3 years, and then they never went far ever again. So that's pretty
I
cool,
mean, it's crazy. I mean, yeah, it's a good point. It's like you said, unfortunately, it is sort of just a big show off thing to do. And to your point, it was because we were in this big propaganda war and actual real proxy wars too, right? And so remember, Vietnam's going on
Oh yeah,
this whole time, and it's Vietnam is just sucking down all these resources, that war, for like 10 years, more than 10 years.
20,
They call it
19, 19.
the 10,000 day war. Yeah, it
Yeah.
just kept going and going and going. And that, so it's kind of amazing even that this got done while that was happening. But when you just think like for all the billions of dollars that are going into those two events or operations or projects, what is not getting paid for? So sometimes I look back and I'm like, oh, no wonder the cities were falling into ruin and people were getting poorer, and we were losing a lot of what made America America. It's interesting too. I'll rewind it for a second. So yeah, to your point, the Soviets were ahead, and the Soviets did Sputnik. And actually, when that happened, what happened was the U.S. government got really scared because they realized that Russian citizens were ahead of American citizens as a whole when it came to things like maybe basic and advanced math and science. And because of that, there was a period where the US government put a lot of effort into making the school systems better at getting Americans more competent in the hard sciences. And it's too bad that sort of slacked off again, probably, I would guess, in the mid 70s when the chickens came to roost from the Vietnam War, and the country was kind of in a like a not an economic depression. No, there was the malaise and the oil crisis, but the country was almost like depressed itself, just emotionally and morally. But yeah, I mean, I guess the one thing is, so the argument is for the moon landing hoax stuff that we were in this pissing contest with Soviet Union. We're both trying to one up each other and show how great we are. And by the way,
Yeah.
the space technology, it isn't a total waste of money. If you thought it was a waste of money, just okay, you showed off. No, like it's actually missile technology to be able to blow each other up, right?
Exactly.
So if you can put a rocket on the moon,
or espionage,
yeah, that's right, and satellites as well. Yeah, perfect. So there definitely were military uses for this technology. So it wasn't a total loss. It was really, there was some investment, and case in point, there's thousands of missile silos both in our country and all over the former Soviet Union that are testament to that we were prepared to shoot rockets at each other, for a much shorter distance and blow each other up with that technology. But I guess the interesting thing is, the same reason why we would be, let's say, tempted to fake a moon landing, it's the same enemy, or at least opponent, competitor, um, that would keep
Hmm.
us honest. So that here's my question: is it was actually pretty easy to verify. It's easy for both sides to verify with radar and radio tracking and things like that when things go up into space. Like
Yeah.
if Russia or any country really at this point shoots something high enough in the air through the
Yeah.
atmosphere, it starts setting off alarms, and all of a sudden, like all of a sudden, it's like war games where we're getting ready to send a huge salvo of missiles the other way. And that's actually almost happened a couple times in our history. Was that somehow someone didn't tell the other side that there was supposed to be a test? This rocket goes up because when we do rocket tests, like we tell the other side, we're like, listen,
Unless
Putin,
you're North Korea, right?
yeah, unless you're North Korea and who's just begging, to get bombed. But yeah, like when we shoot, like there's an Air Force base that shoots um, different rockets up in the air. They've done SpaceX. They also do secret military satellites. I've actually seen one launch. I was adjacent to that place. I've seen it actually a couple times, even because you can even see them from LA, way off in the horizon. But I've been up there. It's up near Lompoc.
Yeah.
It's called Vandenberg, and the rockets are actually, it was not as loud as you would think. But yeah, when that happens, like we actually do call Putin's folks and say, "Hey, listen, we're not starting World War III. Like
Right.
we're testing a rocket." So, anyways, my point is, why, if we were faking it, and they would have, I think, pretty good evidence because they would say, "Hey, the radio transmissions are not,
Yeah.
lining up with where we know your rocket. Like your rocket's over there, but the radio transmissions are coming in too soon, or we're not even getting the radio because the radio transmissions weren't coded. They're there for everybody to hear.
Yeah.
So and then they're like, listen, we can. I mean, you can in some ways you can watch some of this stuff with telescopes, right? So I guess at some point you're like, well, why wouldn't they embarrass the crap out of us by saying, hey, just so you know, world, at the UN, the big meeting, just say in front of the UN, we used to always embarrass each other there. Why not embarrass us and say, look at this fraudulent capitalists trying to pull one over on the whole world and say they're so great and they are so degenerate that they pulled this enormous hoax. Like, why wouldn't they do that? So that would be my first
Exactly.
question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I've looked into it a little bit. This exact point, I'm glad that we mentioned it. I think it was a big deal at that time, and Soviets were tracking. That's what I've heard. Like, and obviously that's what happened. They were tracking Apollo 11. They had that on their like surveillance systems and things like that because apparently there's this. Now I'm not gonna mention any name because I don't remember them, but apparently one of the dudes who I think he's the same guy who Buzz Aldrin like hit in the face or whatever. I think that guy. Speculated, right, that at that particular point in time in history, the Soviets did not have the technology to monitor that thing, and that's his explanation. And that's where I found that whole line of thinking a weak point because I definitely think that the Soviets probably had that technology to monitor these things because the Soviets were like the first people who like crashed into the moon. Let's remember that I believe Luna 2, right? Luna 2 was and it was like in 59. Luna 2 crashed, which was like a spaceship of sorts. In 59, the Soviets crashed it into the moon, and the United States, I believe, only managed to crash their own rockets because at first they were doing hard landings, hard landing as in crashing the spaceship
Yeah.
into the moon. So apparently they managed to crash into the moon 3 years before the US did. So that would mean that, I don't know, just for me thinking about it, they were winning that whole competition for the longest time. I think they managed. I think they could have tracked it, and NASA obviously came out and said that they could have tracked it, but obviously we're questioning whether or not NASA faked it. So I think we can't really use what NASA said on this episode. But I think there's a whole bunch of other details, like pictures coming in from like Japanese back in 2008 or
Yeah.
9. Japanese like took pictures. Another thing I want to mention, because I may end up forgetting about it, but this is like the most to my understanding, the most credible proof that the moon landings did happen is actually, apparently they left some sort of reflective objects on the moon's surface. And since the moon has two sides, right, it has the near side of the moon and the far side of the moon, and to my understanding, the near side of the moon is permanently like looking towards the direction of Earth. So we're permanently looking at the near side of the moon, and from Earth with like telescopes and things like that, we can't really look to the far side of the moon. And a fun fact, the far side of the moon, no one actually did anything to the far side of the moon up until 2019. So like last year, before like COVID-19, when the Chinese managed to like do something, like land their own thing to the far side of the moon. So I think the Chinese really made some pretty cool stuff last year. But what I will say, they left these reflective objects that apparently using lasers right now, using lasers and telescopes. I don't think it's available for the average person, but I think in institutions and things like that, or maybe it's even available for the average person, but you could actually use the laser and the telescope in such a manner that it would actually reflect back from the moon if you hit it
Yeah.
on the same spot where that reflective object is. So that's, in my opinion, that's a really strong point to the whole to the theory that it did happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's funny because as crazy as it sounds, or as amazing as it sounds, it's actually not that different than when you communicate with a satellite or hone in on a satellite signal using a very narrowband signal. So, the same kind of skill you need to, maybe it's even harder actually, because the satellite might be moving further across the sky faster than the moon is at any given moment. But yeah, it's actually, that's the amazing part about, let's say, a radio signal that is so narrow, focused like a microwave,
Yeah.
that it can be like, what is a radio signal at the end of the day? A radio signal can be very broad, like if you turn on a light bulb in the middle of a big room, or it can be really tight, like a laser beam. And a laser beam is just another way of sending information.
Yeah.
What's crazy is laser beams are actually one of the proposed tools that, not just for, let's say, communicating or hitting things on the moon, but actually to push, potentially, that's one of the theories about interstellar travel, is that you might be able to use a very strong laser beam against something like a solar sail. So a solar sail would be like a big light reflective or absorbing substance on a ship, and you would actually push that thing through space with the laser, and you wouldn't even need to, let's say, put rockets on that ship. If that makes sense. Kind of crazy, right? So like the laser is almost like the
Yeah.
wind. Yeah.
I mean,
So
it's pretty hard to
yeah.
comprehend all of this, you know?
It's, yeah, I mean, like, I feel like sometimes we're getting into the Fermi paradox stuff that I always talk about with space. But I guess the one thing, I'll take it back to the more pop culture. You mentioned the dark side of the moon.
Yeah.
It's interesting because if we go about kind of like rumors, and let's get into UFO culture for a second. So
Oh
the
no.
dark side of the moon, yeah, no, yeah, the dark side of the moon. So I'll drop this here. Maybe it's good for a future show. That was always, like forget the moon landing stuff. Though of course that's what we're talking about today. But like on top of that, one
Yeah.
of the things that people talk about is the sort of one of the alleged secrets about astronauts is supposedly they see stuff and have seen stuff that they don't talk about because they've
Oh,
been told to
okay.
keep their mouth shut. Like, so
Okay.
they're seeing objects or crafts or whatever. So one of the like the big legends that I think would be a great another show would be that supposedly some of these astronauts
Yeah.
said that when they landed on the moon, there were like craft waiting for them and watching them, and that the other like bigger UFO conspiracy is that the dark side of the moon, because it faces away from us and is essentially hidden from our observation, that there was some kind of deal that they had bases or something on that side, and that we weren't supposed to go poking around over there.
Okay, that's pretty
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah, yeah.
That's
Food,
pretty
yeah,
crazy. I
yeah. It
mean,
was like I mean, definitely crazy, but definitely maybe
you
not
know,
crazier than the moon landing hoax.
yeah.
Yeah.
Before we jump into, I guess, other cool things that we want to talk about regarding the moon landing and why some people think it could be fake, I will say that it all. Well, this is one of the things, right? Everything happened during the Nixon administration, and like it's probably like if someone's gonna fake it, right, under if one of the presidents gonna fake it, it's gonna be Nixon, right? Like he's the first one in line. And I will say, you mentioned the fact that you mentioned a really good point that I literally just connected in my head. I'm sure people will like theorize this and things like that to some extent, but you've said that there was a lot of money spending, and there and the Vietnam War was highly unpopular in the United States. A lot of like images on the news were like being shown of like some horrific things from the Vietnam War, right? And the money, when you mentioned the money, because I look into like the economic things and things like that, because it's part of my interests and things like that. So basically, during 71, right, 1971. So during because I believe the moon landings, right, stopped at 72, if I'm not mistaken, from like 69 to 72. But like on 71, Nixon got the United States dollar off the gold standard. Basically, that means that United States gain the ability to print as much money as they possibly want, because the actual dollar, it was no longer connected to a certain amount of gold. You couldn't go to like a bank, give them like $100, and the bank at some point, well, it was that whole situation where you could like get your like exchange your dollars for actual gold, that like that fell apart like back in the 30s or 40s, I think. But like it was at least linked, like where I believe like governments and things like that could like cash out like big sums of money for gold and things like that, and people were like countries started like, I'm assuming, like getting their exchanging their dollars for the US gold and things like that. So Nixon sort of cut that off as well. So at that point I'm thinking money was probably, because that was the era where like the early 70s, where money printing like really was like took effect and things like that. So I think it's a lot of like these shady things, because they could have just like funded all of these operations with just paper money that wasn't even money, just pieces of paper that the Federal Reserve like prints out and things like that. So Nixon's administration, the Vietnam War, they go off the gold standard, faking the moon landings. I mean, the socio-economic situation, I think, was there for something like this to happen. It was Nixon. Like Nixon was doing shady things every day. You know what I mean?
What's funny is, after I read that Alan Dulles book, remember the one we covered way
Yeah.
back when we were talking about the CIA and MK Ultra?
Yeah.
So he had a whole bunch of stuff about Nixon. I was born in the 70s. I didn't really know that much about Nixon, other than some stuff about Watergate. And Nixon
Yeah.
always had this reputation. Nixon had this really bad reputation as being a really sneaky guy. And I always thought it was just because of what he did when he was president. But actually, the crazy part is, before he was president, Nixon was way worse. Like Nixon did way more underhanded, sneaky stuff before he was president. I would say he actually behaved himself. Like
Wow.
he was actually the most behaved. I mean the thing he got in trouble for wasn't, I mean, by like the stuff he'd done before, or even other presidents had done.
Yeah.
Listen, I mean, I'm sure I'll probably, some older person will come and start yelling at me because they hated him, and he was super unpopular. But yeah, he actually was not a horrible president in a lot of ways. And it is funny that, like, that's the great irony, is he had done so many other things wrong that were illegal, that the thing he got in trouble for was like the least illegal thing he'd ever done. Um,
Wow.
but yeah, and by the way, the gold standard thing, yeah, that's a whole other conversation. If people can't fathom the laser light sale thing, they'll have to put a pin on that one, because I listened to a book called Capitalism in the 21st Century by Thomas Piketty, And it's interesting. I never really understood what that was all about because it sounds pretty dodgy. It's like, well, wait a minute, you can't exchange gold for money anymore, and you can just print as much as you want.
Yeah.
And the short version is, unfortunately, if there's not enough gold to scale with your economy growing,
Of course,
yeah, then you
because
get
one thing I want to mention,
yeah,
just a thing, because I think some
wrap
of
it up,
our
yeah,
audience will like it. That's because of a certain thing called fractional reserve banking. Pretty much, when you
yeah.
put $100 into the bank, right? At least in the United States, I'm not sure what it's like in the Europe. I would assume it's similar. When you put $100 into a bank, the bank by law only needs to keep 10% of that money, and it immediately lends $90 to other people. And when you put like $100, right? Okay, so the balance sheet increases of the bank by $100, but they only need to keep 10% of that, which that's only $10, and the other 90 they immediately loan out for their loaning out like things and things like that, like loan out business, like loan procedures, loan operations, right? So you immediately have to add that 90 that's in circulation with the alleged 100 that that person has in his like bank card. He will go to the ATM, it will show that yep, your $100 is right there, but actually the bank only has 10% of that money, because everyone's not going to cash out at the same time, so the bank could just easily keep 10% of everyone's money, and just like for all the ATM transactions, they will have more than enough, you know what I mean? And the other 90 is loaned out to other people, so $100 creates another 90, which now a $90 pretty much came into the circulation of the economy out of nowhere, and then that 90 goes into other like banks potentially and things like that. So basically $100 can create up to $1,000. So that's how the money situation gets like completely out of hand and things like that. So basically what I'm trying to say here is what you said, that there's not enough gold to exchange. Obviously that's the case. There's not enough money in the world to pay all the debt in the world. There's more debt
Oh yeah,
than money exists, so the
yeah.
governments need to keep printing more money to cover the debt that already exists, but they print the money by the Federal Reserve buying treasuries. It's crazy. It's a whole thing, dude. There's
Oh
like
yeah.
I don't I don't want to get into it. So
It,
basically it's crazy.
by the way, if, parents listening, if you want to be able to retire to a huge mansion someday, make your kid be a banker. That'll be
Exactly.
a pretty nice career path, and it's hard to fail that way. But and I mean, there's such a, but they'll have to be pretty good at math because it gives me a headache. So
Exactly.
I'm gonna one thing that was interesting was, so what are these theories? It was really so the background is apparently this guy in the 70s who was a famed naval officer, but he had no scientific background. This guy wrote a book, and it was called, what's it called here? It's called "We Never Went to the Moon: America's $30 billion swindle." So this guy self-published. This guy Bill Casing, a former naval officer, who actually worked for Rocketdyne, which is, in fact, this guy. He had no technical degree. He had a bachelor's in English, like me. So I'm like, oh, why can't I write for Raytheon or somebody? He works for Rocketdyne, which is like a big time, space industry company, but that actually was here in the valley where I live for a long time. I mean, I used to drive by. They were right next to the mall. I used to go see them, see their one of their rocket booster factories. And actually, I even used to hear they used to test the rocket boosters up in the mountains around the valley, so you could actually hear like a big loud noise, and you would see smoke from the mountain, and that was them testing one of these boosters. Kind of cool stuff, but probably gave us all cancer. But anyway, yeah, not really joking, but yeah. So because there's a lot of carcinogens and stuff, there's that rocket fuel is poisonous, and there's a lot of pollution now. But yeah, so this is where it started, and I guess what was interesting is in 1980. I didn't even know that these people went back that far. The Flat Earth Society. So
Oh
I'll
yeah,
just
yeah,
put
yeah,
this
yeah,
out
yeah,
front.
yeah.
Yeah, those Flat Earth people are crazy, or I don't know. They're living in a hole. Like the fact that on Rogan, that guy Eddie Bravo, who apparently is a great jujitsu
I love that
person,
guy. I love that guy.
no doubt. He's funny, dude. He's an idiot. I mean, he's
I love that guy.
he's that guy. The irony is the very first Rogan I ever listened to, he was on it, and when I heard his voice, I almost turned it off because he sounded like one of those dipshits on like you know,
Yeah,
kind of look. Sorry for the bad language, guys. On like the local radio, like just some total ignoramus, and he is. He's really, he's there's
but
no
he's
crazy
funny
theory. He's funny though. No,
entertaining, dude. Like that's
he's
for sure.
entertaining. Yeah, he's comic relief. I mean, yeah, he's entertaining. It's kind of funny to hear Rogan like cap back on him, but that guy, yeah, if that guy believes in something, you probably is a sign you should run the other way. But yeah, so
Look into
the
it, man. Did you
look
look
at
into it? Did you look into it,
the flat Earth thing. I mean, it just
dude?
kills me. It's like
Look
really,
into it, dude.
all these years later, we're still arguing about a flat. So the fact that they back this thing, I guess, no surprise. That this is kind of a fringe, nutty, like the land of like strange logic. But it isn't. I mean, like I said, I don't want to totally. That isn't a reason to discredit everything because
Yeah.
once again, you can't use that to sort of shade bias on the rest of the theory. Now, one thing I thought was interesting was there was this movie I mentioned earlier called Capricorn One, and it's got O.J. Simpson in it. Hey, it's
Wait, what?
got yeah. O.J. was in there. He
As an
did a good
actor?
job. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, he's acting. O.J. Telling you, until O.J. you know allegedly cut his ex-wife's head off, he was doing pretty well for himself. He was on top of the world. Everybody loved him, and then he had some problems. But um, anyway, he was in the movie. Actually, the lead of the movie is Josh Brolin. And it's an interesting thing. So here's the. I thought it was a pretty cool concept because they must have been, it had been like what 4 years after this book, and
Yeah.
or actually not even 4 years, 2 years after this book, and for sure there had been people during the time. Like I think Bill Clinton. There's a quote from Bill Clinton that Neil Tyson DeGrasse I think mentions where, Clinton when he was still kind of a more junior politician, or I forget where he was. He was talking to somebody in one of the neighborhoods, and they're like, "Oh, we didn't go to the moon. That's not real." And so for sure there was just the run of the mill people that didn't believe in it for whatever reason. They just thought it was impossible, too much effort. But this movie's cool. So the movie had an interesting idea. The idea is here's how the movie goes. In the movie, sorry, spoilers, but like you've had 40 years to watch it, so
Yeah.
I think we're past that point. So the movie had a pretty cool concept. The idea was there's going to be a mission to Mars instead of the moon, and the mission to Mars, and they're all ready, and everyone's excited. But like the president doesn't even show up because it's like not something he's super interested in. If it messes up, he doesn't want to get embarrassed by it, so he sends like the vice president. Anyway, what happens is right before the rocket launches, one of the NASA people comes to the astronauts, like inside the rocket, and he's like, "Dude, you guys got to get out. Don't ask me why. You got to get out. And they kind of like secretly sneak them out of the rocket and put them on like a plane and fly them away. And the rocket actually still launches. So everyone thinks that like they're in the rocket. And he says, "Listen, here's what happened. We did all these moon missions, and we landed on the moon the first time, and everybody was excited. And then after that, everybody started getting really bored. Where we were spending all this money, but people were like, 'Hey, you interrupted reruns of I Love Lucy.'" And he was like, "Man, it wasn't even like like live shows that like the first run shows I Love Lucy. People were complaining about reruns getting interrupted by this moon stuff." And he was depressed because he's like, "Dude, that's billions of dollars, and if the public isn't behind it, we can't do it." But he had this dream of doing the Mars mission, and he's like, "Look, so here's what happened. The president told me if this thing messes up, he's going to cancel the project. And we were on track and everything was great. And then a couple of months ago, we found out that the company that made the life support system messed up. And this life support system was gonna kill you in 3 weeks. 3 weeks in the mission, this life support system was gonna just break, and you were all gonna die. And that was gonna be like the end of the program, right?
Yeah.
So they figured out that like it was too late to cancel. They couldn't cancel it because that would kill the program too. So what they do is they convince these three astronauts to like pretend they're on the mission. So they'll do like the broadcast as if they're in the space capsule. They'll like have them in like a fake space capsule. They even do a fake Mars landing, which I think will be a good segue after this into some of that footage about whether it could be faked. But they do this whole thing to fake the Mars mission, right? Because the rocket really is out there. So it's sort of like it gets around some of our theories about like, well, the Russians could track it and all this stuff. Like somehow they're faking like the transmissions, and they have a bunch of pre-recorded stuff from the practice stuff, the practice missions, the simulations that they're piping back from the ship.
Oh, by the way,
Yeah,
the dude that you've mentioned, who wrote that book, I believe he's the same guy who punched Buzz Aldrin in the face. I think he could be the same guy, but I will say,
he seems
um,
kind of young though. When I saw the guy, the dude, he seemed like my age.
yeah, exactly, and I think he is
But
like the guy.
that guy
He
would be like in his.
dude,
He would have been. Yeah,
he wasn't fighting. He got
was the
punched by
guy.
an 80-year-old Buzz Aldrin, and he was with the guy who was filming him. And then I think he turned to the guy
Oh
and said,
wow.
"Did you capture it on tape?" And then he tried to sue Buzz Aldrin, but obviously, how are you gonna sue Buzz Aldrin?
Yeah,
You know
he
what I
got
mean?
the,
That's
the jet.
he's like the unsuable guy right now.
Yeah, he
But
can't. It's a hero.
I
Yeah.
will
So I mean,
say,
I guess.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, what I was trying to say is that I actually forgot what I was trying to say. So yeah, whatever, dude.
I'll just finish
Yeah,
I'm going long on the movie, but yeah. So, anyways, the movie was the whole halfway through the movie. What happens is
yeah,
like the whole thing was the rocket was gonna like splash down in the ocean, the capsule,
yeah,
and they were gonna like sneak the people inside of it and say, oh look, see they're there, they're safe. And what happens is the capsule burns up on the way in, but like the astronauts are really still alive, right?
yeah,
So there was an accident. You know what I mean? It was like that space shuttle. Remember the space shuttle that burned up on the way in? It was the same thing.
yeah.
But the problem is, it's like now you've got three astronauts. You know, OJ and Josh Brolin and the guy from Law and Order. Those are the three astronauts, and they're like, "Hey, wait, what does that mean for us if we're supposed to be dead?" And then it turns into like a whole like action movie after that, but of them being chased around the desert and stuff. But it's 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 kind of interesting because it was interesting that they did actually have a scene where what happened was like, for instance, Mars. Turns out Mars's gravity. I didn't know this. I looked this up after I watched the movie. Mars's gravity is like a third of Earth's gravity, and the moon's is like a ninth of Earth's gravity. So they had to like use special effects to make it look like they would use like slow motion in the movie. You mean
Yeah.
they would actually show them like applying, like basically After Effects kind of stuff, but like in the studio to like try to slow them down, like you said, like this footage we're watching. And I think that's a good segue to say like one of the you mentioned this in our script. One of the things that people just object to is to them the footage itself looks fake. Like there's something about the footage to some people
Dude, what do you
that
think about
just
this? Yeah.
that just doesn't look right. And I guess the apple, it falls this fast, it bounces this high, or it doesn't bounce, or whatever happens. So when you watch this stuff that happens not on Earth, it's like your mind doesn't really know what to make of it because it does look fake, right? And it is like it isn't behaving like things behave on Earth. You know what I mean? So of course it should look fake because
I
yeah,
will say my personal opinion for everyone who's watching this podcast on our YouTube channel. You could pretty much see the video that we're watching. I will say that it's not, if you would show a kid who has never seen, people walk on the moon. If you would show this footage to a kid, it would probably not be what he expected to see. And that's, I think, why it gains a little bit credibility, because if they were faking it for the sake of like making it just look super cool and things like that, they would probably make it a lot cooler. You know what I mean? Like this walk that we're
yeah,
seeing is not cool at all. Like I have a few,
look
I
like dummies. Yeah,
like
looks like
let's
they look like 2-year-olds with spacesuits on.
look at this shit.
The way they're falling and yeah, they're clumsy. I mean,
Look,
by the way,
it's super. This is not look like look. This is a good part. I like this part. I think he's gonna start flapping the thing a little bit in the air, because look. I don't think this is Apollo 11 for say, because there were footages
it's
from
over
other
11.
ones,
Yeah.
but it's like, look, dude, he's like barely running. You would probably not make it like this. You know what I mean? You'd probably
By the
want to
way,
make it super cool.
did you ever see Superman 2? I'm
No.
talking about the old school Supermans,
Oh,
the ones with Christopher Reeve.
nah, I
The
don't
one
think
where
so.
yeah, Superman 2, it starts off where like there's a couple of like other people from Krypton that get away. They're like criminals his dad convicted in the first Superman. So they show that scene again, and then they because of an explosion,
Yeah.
they get out of like their little prison or whatever, and they like kill a bunch of astronauts that are doing a moon mission in that Superman. It's
Oh.
not a super good Superman. It's kind of it's some other director got a hold of it and
Yeah.
messed it up. But yeah, I mean, yeah, like you said, they maybe that's part of it is that it does look kind of fake. And like, yeah, if they were gonna, oh, well, let's segue from here. By the way, when you see them falling down and stuff, the one thing I never thought of when they're doing that stuff is those suits had to be super robust because
Dude,
like
for
just like if
real.
you
If you like hit a
yeah
rock and that
if you tear that suit open, you're screwed. Like you know what I mean? Like it's over, dude.
why are they
Like
so
you're not.
confident? Maybe it's
They,
impossible to move in other manner.
I and I don't even think they had Kevlar yet, or bulletproof fabrics and things. So I mean, they must have made it super. They must have when they were doing the testing, they must have been like, dude, you guys are scuffing up your knees like you're a 5-year-old in jeans. Like you're just messing this stuff up nonstop. Like you're
Look
a
at this
little
dude.
little boy riding skateboards all day. Yeah, I mean, I don't know because I mean, by the way, when you were a kid, did you? It's funny because I have a daughter now, and my daughter like almost never falls down, almost never scuffs her knees. But like by the time I was like 10, I had ate crap on asphalt and pavement and concrete and every kind of substance that like my knees are still scarred up. So I'm always like kind of amazed when there's kids that don't just jack up
Yeah.
their hands and their knees and everything. But yeah, so I guess here's the thing is to our point, if you were going to make the footage look good, well, this is my favorite part of the moon landing hoax conspiracy. The theory was that Stanley Kubrick, Stanley Kubrick,
Oh no.
who made one of the. I mean, it's so funny because now we're so used to good special effects from computers and things that if you actually go and watch 2001, it's kind of hard. I mean, it still looks amazing, but it's kind of hard to take your head out of like all the stuff that's come since then to understand like 2001 looks real. Like for people, I mean, even in like it held up even like a couple decades later. Now it's like sometimes you can see a little bit of it, and the computer technology doesn't really look real. Like we're like, okay, well, computers are way better than that, and we didn't have all that cool stuff in the actual 2001. But the theory was, Stanley Kubrick did all these amazing effects for the movie 2001, and the theory was that the government had somehow coerced him or convinced him or paid him off to use some of that same special effects technology to help them fake, some aspects of the space program. So
Mm.
what's kind of crazy is, people go so deep with that conspiracy that they claim that there's like secret clues that Kubrick left for the audience in movies like The Shining, where they say like, Danny's wearing that
Mm.
Apollo space sweater on, and like some of the room numbers and other things that are in the movie are somehow like the exact distance from the Earth to the moon, or all these other different like weird coincidences that they it's I mean here's the thing is you come up with like 10 different numbers. I
Yeah.
promise I promise you you'll see those 10 different numbers at some point in your life where it's some other like it's some of it's just cherry picking stuff
Yeah.
to fit a narrative. But it's kind of like, I mean, by the way, you and I are both, you know, super huge fans of Kubrick. So,
Yep.
obviously we don't like to think that of him. And
No,
I don't know. I mean,
I don't know if
yeah.
he faked it. I think he did a good job. You know what I mean? Like he did a good job.
I don't know.
If he was
I
involved,
watched
yeah.
this and I'm like, he should have done a better job when I watch these things. I'm like, well,
Dude, maybe that's
2000,
part
yeah,
of the logic. You can't make it too good. You know what I mean? Maybe
yeah,
you can't make it
like
too good.
game theory, right? They're like, dude,
Right.
you need to know that they're watching for mistakes, so you got to put the mistakes in there and make
Right.
it look like mundane. Yeah, I
So
mean, yeah,
yeah, basically what I was wanted to ask, because we will be moving shortly to the conclusions, and I still want to like get your general
yeah,
opinion regarding whether it was faked or not. Because personally, I will say I will say that I am leaning towards that it was not faked, because I find it hard to believe that at one point, there was apparently in 65 at the height of the program, 4 years before it happened, there was like 400,000 people working on this, on the program. And I know that, the general theory would be that somewhere around 65, they sort of decided to fake it or something like that. Around 65, they knew that we need to make sure this does happen, so we're gonna try to fake it. So only like the top people knew out of the 400,000 people, and everyone was sort of like putting in their like work and things like that, but they didn't really know that at the end of the day it was all gonna be faked. So I will say that there's a lot of people working on there. There's a lot of people like Buzz Aldrin, everything like that. Everyone seemed like, no, someone would have came out clean, I would say, in those years. So that's why I find it hard to believe. But I will say the fact that he lost the data is pretty crazy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's embarrassing that something so important would get lost, because it's like it's not like we did it again, right? So that is pretty valuable data for whatever, they said, oh well, maybe they said that we were tracking it or whatever from here, but yeah, I don't know. It's pretty crummy. I guess I'm not. Sometimes when I hear about things like that, I'm not super surprised, because there's been a lot of drop balls like that of people that just lose something that's pretty important. I will say it's interesting when Rogan brings this up. So Rogan, has Neil Tyson DeGrasse on every couple months, um, and he'll ask him about this. And Neil Tyson DeGrasse, is like this famous
Yeah.
astronomer here. He does a lot of he's sort of like took the he actually was a protege of Carl Sagan, and Carl Sagan was always really big on speaking to the public about this stuff. So he sort of inherited his legacy as his protege. And he's addressed this a couple times. One of the quotes, though, that actually it's funny. The one of the times I actually disagree with him on. So one thing is, by the way, uh, DeGrasse Tyson, he gets super like offended about this topic. Like it's like to him it's heresy. Where I'm like, I get it, because it's such an important part of what you study in the science, and like kind of the body of work you come from. But like you can't act like a priest yelling at apostates. Like you can't, what I mean? You gotta be able to actually speak to the facts. One of the things he said that I didn't really agree with was he was like, well, it would take so much work to fake it that it would actually be harder to fake it than it would be to actually do it. And I'm
Oh
like,
yeah.
well, okay, yeah, maybe like difficulty, but not cost, because for sure, sending stuff into space, strapped to rockets,
Yeah.
with brand new technology, that's still way more expensive than doing some special effects and doing a conspiracy. Like that's you're right. There's a lot of moving pieces, but and it would be hard, but it's still like people hard. It's not like physics hard. It's not like expense hard. You could pay off a lot of people and still not come close to that figure of sending rockets into space. I do find like I find the topic interesting, because here's the part of it is, I mean, I'll say even from when I was a kid, there's some aspect of that. I always wonder if there's some aspect of this that is people disappointed in the present not matching their past expectations of the future. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. I think I know
Yeah.
what you
So
mean.
like,
Yeah.
what I mean? Like, so like you think about science fiction in like the 50s and 60s, or even stuff like Star Trek in the 60s, or Star Trek when I was growing up, Next Generation. Like people really thought, like the way technology was going, I think people didn't understand that there'd basically been like a lot of artificial money pumped into this one topic, mainly because like we talked about, it had to do with weapons technology and communications technology and espionage technology. So I think people even now really underestimate how expensive and dangerous it is to send stuff in space. It's not like we can't even fly a plane into space yet. Like, yes, no, technically there is like a plane. There are planes that can come to the very edge of the atmosphere, or like basically be in space. But from a practical sense, there's not a plane yet that can take a satellite or passengers and fly from like a runway, turn the engine all the way up and like point up and go into space. Like it takes an extraordinary amount of energy to get out of the Earth's orbit and to get high enough to place like an object in orbit or to fly to the moon or to do these things. And I think people don't understand that in part because it is rocket science. So it's not a simple thing, but it's also probably because a lot of Americans, just like a lot of other people in the world, are not super literate in the hard sciences because we've had so many other things distract us. We've had a lot of wars and things to eat up our educational budgets and to eat up a lot of the, just imagine if we hadn't had Vietnam, if we hadn't had Korea, if we hadn't had, both Iraq wars, etc.,
Yeah.
how much more we could have spent on education in this country, let alone other places, but like instead, no, like we've spent money, like you said, we don't even have. And we're probably stupider for it, unfortunately, or more ignorant, let's say, if not actually stupider. So that's part of it. But the other thing is too, like, dude, you look at that stuff from like the 50s and 60s, and like, we thought we would have moon colonies by now, and then it turns out, it's pretty hard to get water into space for the exact same reason I told you. Is that like really like at this point they're figuring if they ever do have a moon colony, they keep looking for water that's on the moon already. Like if water, like that's one of the big questions is there water on Mars already? Because if we got to bring water to Mars, it's not going to happen. If we got to bring water to the moon, it's probably not going to happen. And that sounds like really daunting, right? Because you're like, oh, well, all those cartoons and comic books and TV shows and science fiction novels I read said we would have space stations and we would be like going to other planets and other galaxies. And no, man, there's like a lot of hard truths. And I think it's depressing. And I think from that point of view, people get so pessimistic that they're like, dude, we haven't even ever done the moon again. So how could that have even been real? Because it seems so far away, like you said, from our capabilities now. And, maybe it is because it's a lot of effort and we have even more obligations now than we did back then, right? Like, we have a lot of we have a lot of tense times and wars and
Yeah.
stuff going wrong. Like it almost seems like the world was simpler back then.
Exactly, dude. That's actually a really good way to round up the whole thing. I don't know, dude. Personally, I think I've said everything I wanted to say regarding this topic because, as I've said, I don't really have. I also don't know have looked into a lot of other stuff, but I don't want to drag it out there since I think you just really rounded it up really well. I will say that I do think I'm leaning towards that the moon landing did happen. So yeah, any like final things you want to mention, or maybe like your own theory whether it happened or not?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think probably people would know I'm definitely on the side of the moon landing happening. I'm also on the side of, yeah, like it is really too bad we couldn't have done more. I think if it wasn't for all these other wars and things that have happened, and for sure, like I'm not ignorant that some amount of our technological advancement, including that same rocket science, right? That rocket science came from a lot of it came from German rocket engineers that we in the Soviet Union kidnapped away from Germany at the end of the war, right? So it was actually Germany that was pioneering, during World War II. Germany was pioneering the first real rockets that got anywhere. So yeah, it's interesting that there's like outgrowths of horrible things like wars that push our technology, but then at the same time they've also taken a lot of resources away from it. And from my point of view, I find it fascinating to think, like from an affordable point of view, what's going to happen. I think if this is a topic that's interesting to other folks, it's worth looking at like what what's his name, Musk is doing. I can't
Elon
say
Musk.
Elon. I always mess up his name. Elon Musk. What Elon Musk is doing with SpaceX, because that solves one of the problems, which is like, dude, we just spent $1 billion in this rocket motor, and now it's going to crash into the ocean. Well, guess what? His doesn't crash. His comes back, and you can like stick more fuel in it, and then use it again. So like that kind of stuff is going to be the next step to actually getting back to the moon or
Yeah.
getting to Mars, and it's going to be space planes when they finally make that happen, which will probably take some kind of new fuel or propulsion technology that There's some kinds of engines that can accelerate
Yep.
extremely fast. Yeah, like that stuff will probably get us to that next point. But
Gotcha.
yeah,
Yeah.
exciting stuff, man.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, pretty much this was an interesting episode for sure. It was definitely a little bit different this week. Yeah, I mean, I had fun looking into this case. I mean, for next week we have something else that's also pretty crazy. I would say. I don't know. Yeah, it was definitely fun. There's a lot of information to unpack here, so that's why I definitely wanted to keep it casual, because obviously, people wrote books on this and they studied this conspiracy for 40 years, or even more, for like 60 years. So I didn't want to, talk too much in regards to all the details, because we probably would get a lot of things wrong, but I think this was just a fun conversation. So yeah, guys, definitely join us next week when we're gonna be, if we're really gonna be talking about what I think we're gonna be talking about, and it's gonna be pretty crazy as well. It's definitely gonna be an event that happened on Earth, but it's an interesting event for sure. So if that's what we are gonna be end up doing, so pretty much, guys, thank you for joining us this week. I hope everyone enjoyed listening to us talk about some unusual stuff this week, and yeah, pretty much we will catch you on the next episode. And for now, as always, just stay safe and peace out.